Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, about turkey and pumpkin pie, and pretending for one night that family meant warmth instead of wounds. I had rehearsed in my head what the evening would feel like. The smell of roasted bird filling the house, soft jazz humming in the background, relatives laughing as they passed mashed potatoes down the table. But when I sat at that long mahogany table, with candles flickering in polished silver holders, I should have known better. My mother-in-law's eyes gleamed the way they always do when she is about to make someone the punchline, and this time, I was her chosen target. She lifted her wineglass, her rings catching the glow of the chandelier. Everyone fell quiet, expecting a toast. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that makes your stomach twist before you even hear the words. Then she said it. She never lifts a finger. Her voice rang out clear, cutting through the clink of cutlery and the shuffle of chairs. A few cousins chuckled nervously, unsure if it was meant as a joke. My husband shifted in his seat, but said nothing. And me, I felt my face heat while my hands froze around the napkin on my lap. It was not the first time she had jabbed at me in public, but the sharpness of those words hit different in the glow of a Thanksgiving table. My chest tightened. My breath caught. I could almost hear the blood pounding in my ears louder than the holiday music that had just been playing on the speakers. 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind in a single second. Every chore I had done, every meal I had cooked, every late night I had stayed up to clean while others slept, all erased with one smug declaration. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came up felt more like a choke. Around me, the room shifted. Plates were still full of stuffing and cranberry sauce, but no one seemed to taste them anymore. Eyes darted toward me, then quickly away, as if waiting for me to confirm the insult by staying silent. That was what I usually did. I had swallowed too many words before, told myself keeping peace was worth the humiliation. But not this time. Not with my son watching from the kids' table, his fork frozen in midair, his small eyes wide as he looked from his grandmother to me. Something inside me snapped, quiet but unyielding, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, loud enough to make a few people flinch. My napkin slid from my lap to the floor, forgotten. My husband glanced up at me, his lips parting as if to say something, then closing again just as fast. He knew better than to interrupt. For the first time in years, I felt taller than my mother-in-law, even though she was still seated at the head of the table like some kind of queen. I took in a breath, steady, the kind you take before stepping into icy water, and let the silence stretch until the weight of it pressed down on every single person in that room. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Should I call her out? Should I simply leave? Should I remind them all of the countless times I had been the one actually lifting fingers, hands, arms, the whole body to keep this family running? Memories flickered like cruel flashbacks. Christmas Eve, me scrubbing pots while she laughed in the living room. Easter, me ironing tablecloths while she whispered to relatives that I liked to freeload. Birthdays, me planning cakes and decorations only to hear her mutter that I wanted attention. My throat burned with words I had kept locked up for too long. Tonight they wanted to break free. The room smelled of turkey skin and cinnamon candles, but under it all, I caught the faint tang of smoke from the fireplace, curling into my nose and mixing with the bitterness in my mouth. My son shifted in his seat again, his little legs swinging nervously. He should not have to see his mother treated this way. And yet maybe it was good he did. Maybe he needed to see that silence is not always noble. That sometimes you stand up, literally, when they expect you to stay down. Her words still echoed in my head, each syllable like a needle. She never lifts a finger. The irony almost made me laugh. I had lifted so many fingers. I had practically carried this house on my back. But she wanted an audience, wanted to draw blood in front of witnesses, so I decided to let the audience see me bleed differently. Not with tears, but with composure sharp enough to cut glass. My lips curved into a small smile, not warm but cold, the kind that lets people know you are not the victim they thought you were. I let my eyes sweep across the table, plates frozen mid-bite, a cousin's eyes wide, fork dangling, an aunt pretending to sip wine though the glass was empty, my husband staring at his lap as if the answer was written on the grain of the wood. Then finally, my gaze landed on her. She tilted her head slightly, daring me with her silence, waiting for me to crumble or laugh it off. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, my palms flat on the polished wood. The candlelight threw sharp shadows across my face. For once, I felt the power in my own stillness. The silence stretched long enough for the clock on the wall to tick twice, loud and intrusive. And in those ticks, I knew the choice was already made. I would not sit down quietly. I would not pretend it was just a joke. My heart was racing, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, and in that instant, I knew the evening would never return to what it had been 5 minutes before. The room was already split. They just did not know it yet. I had no script, no rehearsed lines, but I had truth. And truth, when spoken calmly in the middle of a lie, has a way of shaking the ground. My chest rose, my hands pressed harder into the table, and every eye fixed on me. For the first time, they would hear me, not as the outsider daughter-in-law to be mocked, but as someone who had decided enough was enough. The air felt thicker, the room smaller, the tension sharp enough to slice through the turkey itself, and as I prepared to speak, I saw the faint flicker in her eyes, a shadow of uncertainty. She did not expect me to stand. She did not expect me to fight. And that was her first mistake. The silence after I stood lingered like heavy smoke in the room. I had not even spoken yet, but the simple act of rising from my chair shifted the energy. It was no longer just a holiday dinner. It was a stage, and everyone was waiting to see what I would do. The turkey steamed, untouched. The gravy cooled in its boat. My mother-in-law adjusted her pearls with a deliberate calmness, as though daring me to shatter the fragile civility of the evening. I held her gaze for a second longer, then let mine drop to the candle flame dancing between us. The truth is, I had been holding this fire inside me for years. When I first married into the family, I believed Thanksgiving could be a place of warmth. I imagined myself joining their traditions, carving pumpkins together, laughing over board games after pie. I thought if I worked hard enough to help, if I showed up with the right dish and the right smile, I would be accepted. For the first couple of years, I tried. I baked pies from scratch, peeled potatoes until my wrists ached, polished silverware until I could see my reflection. Each time, she would find a way to twist it. Too much sugar, she would say about the pie. Too many lumps, she would declare about the potatoes. If the silverware gleamed, she would complain the napkins were folded wrong. There was no winning, but I kept trying anyway. Looking back, I realize it was never about the food or the chores. It was about control. My mother-in-law had built her throne in that kitchen long before I arrived, and I was never supposed to share the crown. I was supposed to serve silently, grateful for a seat in the corner, while she received credit for everything. That pattern repeated in small humiliations. At birthdays, she gave me tasks that kept me hidden in the background. At Christmas, she unwrapped my gifts last, tossing them aside with polite indifference. Even at my own son's baptism, she introduced herself to relatives as the one who had organized everything, leaving me standing quietly like a guest at my child's celebration. Each slight was small enough that I could excuse it, but together they built a tower of resentment so high it cast a shadow over every family gathering. Thanksgiving had always been the worst. She loved the spectacle of a long table crowded with food and faces, loved orchestrating every detail as though she were the conductor of a grand symphony. But in her music, I was always the silent note. The first year, she told me to just sit and watch how it's done. The second year, she sent me out for last-minute groceries that somehow took me away from the entire carving of the turkey. The third year, she handed me the mop when dessert was served. And now, this year, she raised her glass and declared that I never lifted a finger. It was not just a lie. It was a performance, meant to cement my role as the lazy outsider in front of an audience who would nod and accept her word as gospel. As I stood there, I thought of the weeks leading up to this dinner. I had been the one to pick up the special spices she insisted on. I had helped my husband iron his shirt and pressed his tie so he would look perfect. I had baked a pecan pie that morning, the scent still lingering on my hands. And yet, when she opened her mouth, all of that vanished. To her, effort from me did not exist. Only failure did. And that failure was always loud, always displayed in front of others. I realized then that silence had only fed her appetite. Each time I bit my tongue, she grew bolder. Each time I smiled through the insult, She sharpened her knife for the next cut. My gut had warned me earlier in the day. When I arrived with my dish, she had barely glanced at it. "Leave it on the counter," she said, waving her hand as though shooing away a fly. She was too busy adjusting the tablecloth, measuring its edges with meticulous fingers. Her control was not about beauty. It was about dominance. I remember the way she paused at the doorway when she thought no one was watching. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on each of us as if we were pieces on a chessboard. The children giggled in the den. My husband fiddled with the wine opener. I set down my bag and tried to catch her eye, to offer a smile, but she turned away before I could. That was her signal. Tonight, I would be her target again. And yet, even with the signs, I had told myself it would be fine. I had dressed carefully, a soft cream sweater and simple earrings, nothing too loud that might draw her criticism. I had rehearsed polite conversation in the car, reminding myself to ask about her garden, her church friends, her volunteer work. I wanted to believe that if I stayed in safe territory, we might pass the evening without bloodshed. But a gut feeling is rarely wrong. Beneath the clatter of dishes and the smell of sage and butter, I had felt the storm gathering. Her voice when she greeted me was too sweet, stretched thin like sugar about to crack. The way she watched me pour water into glasses was too sharp, like she was waiting for me to spill a drop. By the time she raised her glass for that toast, I knew. This was never going to be a quiet Thanksgiving. The room around me felt smaller, with every memory pressing in. My father-in-law cleared his throat, pretending to be interested in the cranberry sauce. My sister-in-law scrolled her phone under the table, though I noticed her smirk. The cousins shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other in low tones. And my husband, my partner, sat silent, his fork resting on his plate. His silence cut me deeper than her words. It told me that even he had grown used to this script, that he had accepted his mother's insults as part of the price of family gatherings. But I was done paying. The candles flickered, casting shadows on the walls like ghosts of every slight I had endured here. The laughter that had filled the house minutes before had vanished, replaced by a brittle quiet. I felt my throat tighten, but it was not fear this time. It was resolve. I would not let her write the story again. Not tonight. Not in front of my child. My palms pressed flat against the table, grounding me. The polished wood was cool under my skin, a stark reminder of the control she thought she had. But in that moment, the control shifted. For the first time in years, she had no script for what came next. I lifted my chin and let my eyes settle on her again. She sat so sure of herself, lips curved in triumph, expecting me to laugh it off or sit back down. But I could see it now, the faint flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as the silence stretched too long. She had wanted a show, and I was about to give her one, just not the one she had written. The moment stretched so long that I could hear the tick of the dining room clock above the mantel. The sound mocked the silence, each second landing like a drumbeat in my chest. My mother-in-law sat there as if nothing extraordinary had been said, her chin lifted, her hand resting lightly on the stem of her glass. The smug curve of her lips told me she thought the matter was already settled. She had thrown her dagger, and now she expected me to bleed in silence. But I did not move. I looked at her and let the silence speak for me. It was the first time she seemed unsure. Finally, I asked the question that had been clawing at my throat. "What did you just say?" My voice was calm, too calm, and that scared me more than any shouting ever could. Her eyebrows lifted, feigning innocence. "Oh, you heard me," she said sweetly. "It was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." Around the table, a few relatives chuckled again, but their laughter died quickly when they saw I was not smiling. I glanced at my plate, still full of turkey and mashed potatoes, and the sight turned my stomach. The food that should have been comfort now looked like props in a cruel play. I remembered how I had stayed up the night before, basting a side dish she requested, trying to make it perfect because she insisted on tradition. And now, she erased it with one line. My chest tightened, and a bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "A joke," I repeated, shaking my head. "Funny how your jokes always land on me." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "You're reading too much into it," she replied, waving her hand like she was swatting at a fly. "Everyone knows you're not the type to get your hands dirty. You're more of a guest than family." The words sliced through the air, I felt my son's eyes on me from across the room, his small face pale with confusion. Guest, not family. The insult settled heavier than any turkey could. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to scream. My fingers pressed into the table, the wood cool under my skin, grounding me. Not family? I asked, my voice low. Interesting. Because I remember being the one scrubbing dishes until midnight last year, while you told everyone you had cooked the meal yourself. I remember setting the table for 20 people while you sat on the phone bragging about how perfect everything looked. I remember being asked to stay out of the family photo because I was too sweaty from cleaning. So tell me, what part of that makes me a guest? The room crackled with tension. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check her phone but clearly listening. My father-in-law cleared his throat and reached for more wine, though his glass was already full. No one dared speak. The silence was thicker than gravy, and every eye flicked between us like they were watching a tennis match. Her cheeks flushed crimson, but her voice stayed sharp. "You exaggerate," she snapped. "I've always said you could help more if you wanted. You never volunteer. You just stand around waiting for someone else to do the work." I let out a short laugh, humorless. "Really? Because I have the receipts." Literally. I reached into my purse hanging on the chair and pulled out the folded receipt from the caterer who had called my phone that morning. I placed it on the table between us. "Do you know why the caterer called me, and not you?" "Because my name was on the order. I paid for half of this meal, and you still dared to say I never lift a finger." Gasps rippled around the table. A cousin leaned forward to see the paper. My mother-in-law's lips parted, but no words came out at first. She blinked rapidly, then scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything. You just wanted credit. You always want to make yourself look better than the rest of us." I looked at her, then at the others. "Want credit?" My voice rose slightly, my pulse quickening. "No, I want respect. There's a difference. Respect means acknowledging the truth, instead of tearing someone down for sport. Respect means treating the mother of your grandson as part of the family, instead of an intruder. Respect means not humiliating me in front of everyone and pretending it was just a joke." Her chair creaked as she leaned back, crossing her arms. "You're overreacting," she muttered, but the confidence in her tone had cracked. I could see it in the way her fingers tapped against the wood, restless. For the first time, the crown slipped from her head, and she knew it. I straightened, my breathing steady now. The weight of years of silence lifted with every word I spoke. I'm not overreacting. I'm done reacting quietly. I'm done pretending this treatment is normal. Tonight, everyone here saw how you speak to me. Tonight, everyone knows the truth." I heard my son's chair scrape across the floor as he stood from the kids' table. He shuffled closer, his small footsteps loud in the silence. He tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, can we go home?" His voice cracked my heart open. I placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "Soon," I whispered back. "Very soon." The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This was not just about me anymore. It was about the example I set for him. He needed to see that his mother would not allow herself to be disrespected, that dignity mattered even when it came at the cost of comfort. I met my mother-in-law's eyes once more. Her smile was gone. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, her face stiff like a porcelain doll about to crack. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so it cut through the air like glass. "You wanted to humiliate me tonight, but instead, you've humiliated yourself. I hope you enjoyed the spotlight, because everyone here will remember what you said, and what I did when I finally stood up." The silence after those words was deafening. My hands no longer shook. My son's fingers clutched mine tighter, and that was all the strength I needed. Around the table, no one moved. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the room whole. For once, I was not the one shrinking in those shadows. She was. And as I stood there, holding my son's hand, I realized this was the moment everything changed. The lines were drawn. The roles had shifted. She had always wanted control, but tonight, in front of everyone, she lost it. The dining room had never felt so alive, and yet so suffocating at the same time. Candles flickered nervously, as if they too were afraid of what had just been spoken. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and cranberry sauce that once promised comfort now clung to the air like a heavy perfume I could not escape. My pulse was pounding in my ears, each beat louder than the scrape of silverware that had fallen silent mid-meal. Every face at the table told a different story. My father-in-law's brow was furrowed, but his mouth stayed shut, his eyes glued to his plate as though the mashed potatoes might rescue him from having to take a side. My sister-in-law smirked into her wineglass, clearly entertained by the drama, her thumb flicking over her phone like she might be recording the moment for later gossip. Cousins avoided my gaze altogether, pretending to be fascinated by the garnish on the turkey platter. Even the children sensed the tension. Their giggles from the kids' table had faded into whispers, and my son stood close by, clutching my sleeve like a lifeline. Across from me, my mother-in-law sat stiff, her pearl necklace catching the light but not distracting from the flush rising up her neck. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as though searching for the perfect retort but finding none. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, like the stillness before a storm when the air hums with electricity. I could feel my own hands trembling slightly, pressed flat on the table. My nails dug into the polished wood, grounding me. The surface was cool beneath my palms, and the sensation steadied me just enough to hold my voice firm. I spoke again, softer now, but no less sharp. You wanted a performance. Here it is, but it will not end the way you imagined. Her eyes narrowed, but I saw the flicker of panic behind the steel. You're ruining Thanksgiving, she hissed, trying to keep her tone low enough that it sounded like discipline, not desperation. I straightened, lifting my chin, and let my gaze sweep the room. No, I replied evenly. You ruined it the moment you stood up and decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. You thought I would stay quiet, that I would swallow the words like I always do. But not this time. The words hung heavy, pressing down on the relatives who shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. My father-in-law cleared his throat again, his hands twitching toward his glass, but he stayed silent. He had mastered the art of watching battles without lifting a finger himself. That silence spoke volumes. He would rather protect his peace than his daughter-in-law's dignity. I caught the reflection of my own face in the polished silver platter at the center of the table. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. I almost did not recognize the woman staring back. She was not the timid guest anymore. She was someone who had finally found her voice in the very room where it had been stolen time and time again. My mother-in-law finally spoke again, her voice laced with sugar that barely masked the venom beneath. Why are you making such a scene? We're all family here. You should know how to take a little teasing. A laugh escaped me, low and incredulous. Family? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Family protects each other. Family lifts one another up. Family does not turn holidays into weapons. If this is what you call family, then maybe I should reconsider what the word even means. Gasps echoed softly. One cousin muttered something under her breath, quickly silenced by the elbow of her husband. My son shifted closer, his small hand slipping into mine. His warmth traveled up my arm and into my chest, reminding me why I was standing my ground. The clink of a fork finally broke the spell. My husband, who had been silent far too long, set his fork down with a deliberate motion. He lifted his head, his eyes darting between his mother and me. For a moment, I thought he might finally speak up, but instead, he sighed and whispered, "Maybe we should just eat." His attempt to smooth things over fell flat, the words landing heavy and useless in the thick tension. I turned to him, my voice calm but unflinching. "Do you hear yourself? She just stood in front of everyone and called me useless, and your solution is to eat?" His face reddened, his lips pressing together, but he had no answer. The silence was louder than any defense he might have given. The candles sputtered, their flames bending under a draft that slipped through the room. I leaned closer to my mother-in-law, my voice dropping just enough that it cut like glass. "You thought you were clever, embarrassing me in front of everyone, but the only thing you've managed is to reveal yourself. And now, when they replay this night in their minds, they will remember your words, not mine." Her lips trembled, and she reached for her wineglass, hiding behind the rim as though the liquid might swallow her shame. I did not let my eyes leave her. I wanted her to feel the weight of every second she had forced me into silence over the years. Then I straightened, pulling my son gently closer, his small frame pressed against my side. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm, final. Chairs scraped as people shifted, murmurs rising like a low tide. My mother-in-law's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the silverware. "If you walk out now, don't bother coming back," she spat. The room fell silent again, stunned by her outburst. My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my face calm. "Maybe that's for the best," I said, my tone even, almost quiet. And with that, I took my son's hand, guiding him toward the door. The hardwood floor creaked under our steps, each one echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Behind me, I heard whispers rise and fall, a chorus of confusion and disbelief. Some voices tried to call my name, others called hers, but I did not stop. The hallway smelled faintly of pine and furniture polish, a sharp contrast to the heavy scent of the dining room. At the doorway, I paused, turning back just once. The sight burned itself into my memory. My mother-in-law still at the head of the table, clutching her glass with white knuckles, her face a mask of fury and fear. The rest of the family frozen in place, forks suspended, mouths half open, unsure whose side they should take. The feast untouched, the turkey growing cold, the cranberry sauce congealing under the weight of silence. I opened the door, the chill of the November night rushing in, clean and sharp. It filled my lungs with a clarity I had not felt in years. My son squeezed my hand, and together we stepped into the dark, leaving behind the flickering candles, the heavy perfume of food, and the choking grip of her words. The door clicked shut behind us, the sound final and liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. My steps were steady, my son's beside mine, as we walked into the night. And yet, even as the cold air cleared my head, I knew this was only the beginning. Families do not surrender power easily, and she, more than anyone, would not forget the night she lost control. The night air was sharp against my face as I stepped out onto the porch. My son's small hand was warm in mine, his grip tight like he was afraid I might let go. Behind us, muffled voices rose in waves, the dining room erupting into chaos the moment the door clicked shut. I could still picture the frozen stares, the untouched plates, the wine glasses trembling in uncertain hands. That scene would replay in their minds long after tonight. We walked to the car slowly, the crunch of gravel beneath our shoes louder than it should have been. My son looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Are we in trouble, Mom?" he asked softly. The question cut deeper than any of my mother-in-law's words. I bent down, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. We just decided not to let someone treat us badly anymore." He nodded, but his little brow stayed furrowed, as though trying to understand the complicated layers of adults and family politics. I opened the car door for him, helping him climb inside. As I fastened his seatbelt, I heard the front door of the house slam open. My mother-in-law's voice pierced the quiet street like a siren. "You don't get to walk away from this," she shouted. Her heels clicked rapidly against the porch steps. She stood at the edge of the driveway, her figure illuminated by the porch light, her face twisted with anger. I straightened slowly, my hand still on the car door. "Actually," I said calmly, "I do." My words floated across the night air, colder than the wind. She huffed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Do you have any idea how you embarrassed me? In front of my family? In my house?" I felt my jaw tighten. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You embarrassed yourself. All I did was finally say what everyone already knows. You humiliate me because you think no one will stop you. But tonight, I did." She took a step forward, her heels crunching into the gravel. For a moment, I thought she might actually strike me, but she stopped short. Her eyes darted toward the window, where shadows of relatives moved nervously behind the curtains. She realized she still had an audience, even out here. Her voice shifted, sugar dripping over venom. "If you leave now, don't expect to be welcomed back. Not for Christmas, not for birthdays, not ever." I leaned on the car door, meeting her gaze. "Then I suppose that's your choice. But I won't beg for a seat at a table where I'm only invited to be humiliated." Her lips parted, but before she could reply, the front door opened again. My husband stood there, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He looked between us, then stepped onto the porch. "Mom, please," he said, his voice weary. "This isn't helping." She turned on him sharply. "You stay out of this." She's the one tearing this family apart. I laughed, but it wasn't from humor. Tearing the family apart? I echoed. Number! What tears families apart is years of manipulation, years of insults dressed as jokes, years of silence from the people who should have defended me. Tonight is not the beginning of the fracture. Tonight is just the moment you lost control of the narrative. My husband shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't defend me, but he didn't defend her either. His silence was its own confession. My mother-in-law's face reddened further. You think you're clever, she spat, but you've just alienated yourself from everyone. You'll regret this. I felt my son's eyes on me from inside the car. I couldn't let him see me waver. I squared my shoulders and replied, No, the only regret I have is not standing up sooner. There was another stir behind the curtains, and then the door creaked open again. My father-in-law stepped out, his expression grave. He walked down the steps slowly, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. Enough, he said quietly, but firmly. She jerked away from his touch, glaring at him as though he had betrayed her. He shook his head. You've said enough tonight. Let it go. Her mouth opened in protest, but he raised a hand, silencing her. For a moment, I almost saw pity in his eyes as he looked at me. He didn't say he was sorry, but the weight of his silence carried something different than hers. Resignation, perhaps. Maybe even shame. I opened the driver's door, sliding into my seat. My son leaned toward me, whispering, Can we just go home now? His voice trembled. I kissed the top of his head. Yes, we're going home. As I turned the key, the engine roared to life, breaking the fragile stillness. My mother-in-law stepped back, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. She looked smaller somehow, standing there in the driveway with her husband's hand on her shoulder. Smaller because, for once, her words hadn't worked. I backed out slowly, the headlights sweeping across the house. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of the family crowded by the window, watching in silence. Some looked shocked, some looked curious, and a few looked almost relieved. I wondered if they saw in my actions what they themselves had longed to do but never dared. As we drove down the quiet suburban street, I finally exhaled. The tension left my body like steam escaping a kettle. My son reached across the console, his small fingers brushing mine. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. My throat tightened, tears prickling my eyes. I squeezed his hand gently. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of us. But I knew this wasn't over. Families like this don't let go of their control easily. The phone calls would come, the guilt trips, the accusations, the attempts to rewrite the story. She would not accept defeat quietly. Yet, as I drove farther from that glowing house, I realized something vital. I had already won. Not because I had silenced her, but because I had reclaimed my voice. When I pulled into our driveway, the porch light spilled over the familiar welcome mat. My son yawned, his head heavy against the seatbelt. I unbuckled him, carrying him inside, his arms wrapping around my neck. The house smelled faintly of vanilla from the candle I had lit earlier that morning. It felt warm, safe, ours. I tucked him into bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Mom, he murmured sleepily, will we ever go back there? I paused, my chest tightening. Maybe, I said softly, but only if they learn how to treat us right. He nodded, his eyes closing, drifting into dreams. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the quiet hum of my phone. Already, messages were pouring in. Some from cousins, apologizing awkwardly. One from my sister-in-law, filled with sarcasm. And one from my mother-in-law, a single line. You made a mistake. I set the phone down, the screen glowing faintly in the dim room. A mistake? Number? The only mistake would have been staying silent one more time. And as I sat there in the stillness of my own home, I realized something else. Thanksgiving had not been ruined that night. It had been reclaimed. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was strangely quiet. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting thin lines of gold across the kitchen table. My phone sat there, buzzing intermittently, lighting up with names I knew by heart but no longer trusted. I let it ring. I let it vibrate against the wood, until the sound became nothing more than background noise. For once, I did not rush to explain myself or defend my actions. For once, I chose silence. When I finally checked the messages, they were exactly what I expected. My mother-in-law's first text was short, sharp, the kind of message meant to pierce. "You humiliated us." The second tried to twist guilt into responsibility. "You're tearing the family apart." The third wore the mask of sweetness. "We can forgive this if you apologize." I scrolled through them slowly, almost amused. The pattern was so predictable, it felt like reading from a script I had memorized years ago. Anger, guilt, false mercy. Always the same rotation. Cousins chimed in too, some apologizing timidly, others telling me I should have stayed quiet. My sister-in-law sent a smirking emoji, as if the entire night had been entertainment for her. My father-in-law did not message at all, and that silence spoke louder than anything. My husband, sitting at the other end of the couch, stared at his own phone but did not share what he saw. His silence had been his armor for years, and now I wondered if it was also his prison. I poured myself coffee, the bitter steam rising into the quiet kitchen. Each sip steadied me, reminded me that this was my home, my space, where her voice could not reach unless I let it. My son padded in, rubbing his eyes, his small footsteps soft on the tile. "Are we safe here?" he asked in a whisper. My chest ached. "Yes, sweetheart," I told him, pulling him close. "We are safe. This is our place. No one decides that but us." The hours stretched into days, and still the calls came. She left voicemails laced with drama, sighing heavily before accusing me of cruelty. She told neighbors I had stormed out for no reason. She told church friends I was unstable. She painted herself as the victim, as she always did, crafting a story where I was the villain who destroyed Thanksgiving. I listened to exactly one voicemail before deleting the rest. Her words no longer carried the power they once had. They were echoes, nothing more. But silence is not always peace. Silence can be heavy when you know someone is plotting behind it. A week later, she showed up at my door, my father-in-law trailing behind her. She carried a tin of cookies, wrapped in red ribbon, the same brand she always bought from the store but claimed to bake herself. She smiled, the kind of smile that never touched her eyes. "We thought we'd drop by," she said lightly, as if nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. My son peered from the staircase, clutching the railing. "We need to talk," she insisted, her tone soft, rehearsed. "Family shouldn't fight like this." I almost laughed. "Family shouldn't humiliate each other either," I replied. Her smile wavered, but she pressed on. "Let's just move forward. We'll forget this ever happened." I shook my head slowly. "Number, you don't get to erase it. You don't get to pretend it never happened. You wanted everyone to see me small. Instead, they saw the truth, and so did I." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you've won?" she whispered. I met her gaze without flinching. "Number, this isn't about winning. This is about finally drawing a line." My father-in-law shifted awkwardly, placing a hand on her elbow. "Come on," he murmured, but she yanked her arm away, glaring at me one last time before turning back toward the car. The tin of cookies dangled from her hand, swinging violently with each step. I closed the door gently, not slamming, just firm. The click of the lock echoed like a final word. That night, my husband and I sat in the living room. The silence between us was heavy. He stared at the carpet, his voice low. "You know she'll never forgive this." I looked at him steadily. I didn't ask for her forgiveness. I asked for her respect, and since she can't give it, I'll live without it. He did not answer. He only nodded faintly, his shoulders sagging. I wondered then if he realized the cost of his silence all these years, the way it had allowed her cruelty to bloom unchecked. Days turned into weeks. Christmas invitations came, but not to me. Photos appeared on social media, my mother-in-law smiling with relatives, her captions dripping with pointed remarks about family traditions without drama. At first, the sight stung, but soon, the sting dulled, replaced by something else. Relief. Relief that I was not there to endure another round of carefully sharpened insults. Relief that my son was not there to see me diminished again. I began to notice the small freedoms. Waking up without the dread of another family gathering looming. Cooking dinner in my own kitchen without hearing her voice criticize the seasoning. Laughing with my son at the table, No performance, no judgment, just laughter. It felt like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. One evening, my son brought me a drawing he made at school. It was of our family, just the two of us, standing under a bright sun, holding hands. No grandmother, no extended relatives, just us. At the bottom, in uneven letters, he wrote, "We are enough." My throat tightened as I held the paper. He was right. We were enough. The messages from her eventually slowed. Silence replaced them, but this time it was not heavy. It was empty, hollow, the sound of someone realizing they had lost control. I do not know if she truly understood what she lost that night. The authority, the obedience, the audience. But I knew what I had gained. It was not about victory. It was about dignity. About showing my son that we do not let cruelty define us, not even when it wears the mask of family. About proving to myself that I could stand tall, even when the person trying to tear me down sat at the head of the table. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, and strangely, I found myself grateful. Grateful that she had pushed too far, that her own arrogance had given me the chance to break free. Grateful that my son had witnessed the moment I finally stood, so he would know that strength sometimes looks like calm defiance in the face of cruelty. Weeks later, as I set the table for a simple dinner with just the two of us, I realized something. The table was smaller, the food was simpler, but the peace was greater than any grand feast I had ever endured in her house. I looked at my son, his laughter filling the room, and thought to myself, she wanted me silent, she wanted me invisible. Instead, she made me stronger. And maybe one day, she will understand what she truly lost. But if she doesn't, it no longer matters. Because I finally found myself. And I am not going back.